There's, well, hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, we have more in person than we have online, which is good. But we'll see how many other people join. So COFMUG June 2018, or the title of the meeting, Give It a Rest. So today's meeting topic is courtesy of Joe, who said, you know, I really don't know enough about the consuming REST APIs with FileMaker, so teach me how to do that. So that's what we're going to do tonight. So to start off with our function of the day, I figured we're not actually going to do a function of the day, but rather a function package of the day. And that goes to this forum post in the community by a very good developer named Wim de Kort. And if you just Google FileMaker curl, no need to remember the syntax, you'll probably find this post. I will also post these links in the COFMUG page discussion for this meeting, and probably link to it on the YouTube recording as well. So what this package is it's a FileMaker file that just has, I think, 40 custom functions, a lot of custom functions that are built around building curl requests. So if you go in here, go to File, Manage, Custom Functions, you'll see that he has a number of functions here, all designed to build curl things. Now, we're obviously not going to cover all of these today. So I just want to pick one, which is going to be curl header. Curl header name value.
Do you need to grab all of those?
No, somebody on chat just reminded me that I'm not sharing my screen with GoToMeeting, so that means it's also not getting recorded. So apologies to everybody that's watching this on YouTube with audio only for the first minute. So yeah, this is the forum post you guys are looking for. Curl options, no need to remember the syntax. If you actually go to community.filemmaker.com/docs-8177. That's the file you're looking for. It's a free download, no paywall. Make sure that if you like this package to comment on that post and thank Wim de Kort for making this. So out of all the custom functions that come in here related about curl, we're going to talk about curl headers today, because headers are really at the core of using curl to make requests. It's probably the most common starting point that you're going to see. I'm not sure if GoToMeeting will pick up the zoom, but you can see these are pretty simple custom functions, but it's designed to give you a uniform format for building your curl requests. So this custom function, you'll see it adds a space, a -h, and then it quotes your name and the value that you pass to it. So curl header, 2 parameters, name and value. And what this will give you, if I open up a data viewer here, go into my watch tab, do curl header, and I'm going to give it a name of, let's just say, application encoding. I'm going to give it a value called JSON, something like that. And when I evaluate that, you'll see it actually builds what's going to be that curl header for me. So the reason this saves me time, and the reason these custom functions are useful as a copy-paste thing into any file where you're doing API work, where you're going to consume an API with FileMaker, is it saves you from having to remember this specific format of dash whatever the letter is, because they're all these shortened letter codes for curl, and then automatically quoting, inserting that colon and space right there between the key and the value pair. So If I don't have to look that up on the curl website every time, then, you know, it's faster for me to just paste these custom functions in. Remember that it begins with an underscore curl, and then figure out which function I need to do to build the header. So if I'm going to build successive headers, and this might come in use later, you can just chain a whole bunch of these together, and it will build all of these headers together. So a lot of times you'll have curl requests that will require more than one header. So you can build your whole curl request, your curl parameters, with just chaining these functions together with a bunch of ampersands in between. And it automatically sticks the space in at the beginning, so you don't have to worry about badly formed requests from not having the space between. So the demo file that he came up with has a lot more as well. You'll see it's actually using a website called Mockbin. And what Mockbin does, it's a pretty cool site. It's a free web service that you can test APIs against. You can just send it something and it's going to send you a response, like a dummy response. So, and that will get you something that looks like this response over here, where it will say, like, what time did that come back at, that type of thing. So he's got a function in there that says curl create mockbin that will actually put all of this together and give you a response here. There we go, Thursday, June 21st, and then it's in GMT. Then it gives you a bin ID, so you can actually go online to Mockbin, type in that ID. Well, hopefully you can copy and paste it, although you can't because it's in a custom dialog. So you can go look up that ID and actually see what Mockbin received from your system. So this essentially, it's something that you can bounce off of to test, make sure that you're sending the data you think you're sending. Just kind of as a second check, where if you don't get it right with the API you're trying to do, you can test it to make sure that the request you're making is well formed. So that's really all with this file. If you want to see how that's being put together, just take a look at that script and see what it's doing. Yeah. So essentially, he is setting a variable with all of his curl options. He's using his custom parameters, curl request, post, that just specifies as a post request, curl header, accept, application /JSON. That's why I was trying to remember off the top of my head and I couldn't. And then curl dump header. So what all of these things, where are all these functions coming from? It's coming pretty much directly from the curl library. So that's functions of the day for today. Go download that file. I think we've actually referenced this file before, but it's definitely one you want to have in your folder of tools to do. So that is that. So these are coming directly from the curl library itself. So the next place we're going to kick off our give it a rest presentation is curl's website. Now it's just curl.haxx.se. And when I first went here, when I first started using curl however many years ago, I couldn't believe that this was a legitimate website. I thought it was Russian hacker thing. But sure enough, that is the official website, curl.hax.se. Curl supports all these different transfer methods. So basically, at a glance, curl is a library of code that lets you communicate between two servers over the web, or, well, two computers over the web. Usually it's server to server, like a PHP server to some other PHP server, API server or something. But in FileMaker's case, you can also use it to communicate between FileMaker and an API. Curl makes things standardized.
What's API?
API? Application Programming Interface. So an API is essentially anybody that wants you to be able to use their service will give you an API to interface with their application. So like Google Maps has an API where I can send a request to Google Maps and get back directions between my house and somewhere else without having to go to their website and use it like through their interface. So it's kind of like going behind what you see in a web browser and being able to communicate with them directly. So most commonly it's used for that type of thing. There's also SDKs, which are software development toolkits, which are more in-depth, designed to, like if you're building your own application and you want to build like payment processing into your application, you'll get a software development kit for a merchant processor that'll allow you to process credit card transactions. So both an API and an SDK are related ways for you to be able to use other people's services and get results back to your application. So curl is a kind of standardized library of code that allows you to make those communication requests. It takes care of sending the request for you and receiving the response back and kind of encoding that and like decoding it when it comes back. So it makes it easier to work with. Because otherwise you'd have to write all your own code to do this. And, instead of doing this in, that FileMaker script was 3 lines. So if you want to do it on your own, just natively in code, you can do it. But you do it in command line and it's maybe, you have to do connect to server, verify that you're connected, send username and password, get that response back. So there's all this stuff that happens in that communication that this library is taking care of for you. So there is curl's, standard mission statement on the website, used in command lines or scripts to transfer data. It's also used in cars, television sets, routers, printers, audio. Yeah, so it's just, billions of transactions daily are done with curl from one computer to another. And it's just more standardized communication. It's open source. Since it's open source, it gets thousands of contributors. They do have sponsors that help them host the website and that kind of stuff, pay off hosting fees for their documentation. But since it's open source and they have thousands of contributors, it's generally reliable in terms of its usability. Like it doesn't break all that often. Most of the time when it breaks, it's because it's something you do when you're using the library, not the library itself. So very rarely you'll run into a bug. Also, since it has so many contributors, it's updated very frequently. Now, the version of curl that is in FileMaker is only as current as whatever version FileMaker has bundled inside. So if you keep that in mind, where the most recent stable release on their website, 7.60.0, was released on the 16th of May 2018, and that was like a week before FileMaker 17 hit the shelves. So FileMaker 17 isn't going to have this release of curl in it. Maybe the next update of FileMaker will have that in there. So, think if you do end up running into an actual curl problem with FileMaker, you'll have to consider like what version of curl you have to troubleshoot that. Fortunately, like I said, it's really reliable, and I've never had a problem with the built-in version of curl with FileMaker so far. And then source code, you don't need to worry about source code because it's already bundled in FileMaker for you ready to use. So there is a lot on curl. If you thought the 40 custom functions was a lot, there's much, much more on curl. Most of the time, curl is going to, you're going to be coming to this website to get curl status codes. That's not code. Or error codes, I guess. So this is the documentation for error codes, and there's a few. Usually they're either, when they're returned to you, they're either returned as a number or as this specific message. So when you're troubleshooting curl, you're probably going to come back here. So what does all this have to do with headers, which is the main topic of discussion today? So a header is essentially, if you think about it as a written letter that you're going to put in an envelope, stick a stamp on, and send to somebody's mailbox. When they get that mail and they open up that letter, if you just send them a letter that has no context in it, they might not respond to you because they don't know how. So like maybe an employer wants you to send a paper resume that has a cover letter that introduces yourself and basically has that first initial interview. And if you don't include that cover letter and you just send your resume, they might not respond to you because they don't know enough about you. So what headers do in purposes of curl is they act as that cover letter. They act so you can explain what it is you really want them to do in a more verbose format. So before, when I was looking at the custom function, I was saying accepts application/JSON. And now what that means as a header is I'm telling the server I'm sending that to that when you respond back to me, the format that I accept is JSON. And JSON format's just what you saw in that FileMaker file, open recent. So this is JSON formatting right here. It's a specific key value pair with specifications for how to come back. And actually on this response, you can see it actually has a headers section that has all these headers in there that were sent. So curl will automatically send some headers for you. It has some default settings that it will always try to make on your behalf. So like user agent is one that usually comes through. And you see in this, it's actually FileMaker /16.0 is the user agent. So some of these things, X forwarded 4, that's coming from an IP address. So you see that it's got a WAN and an external and an internal IP address that's being included. So some of these headers are already automatically in there. So you don't have to worry about, oh no, like I want to make this API request, but I have to include 40 headers in there, right? No, you only have to do a few. You only have to do the ones that you want to be specific about. And a lot of the times it's telling them that you want the response back as JSON. What type of request you're making? Is it post or get or put? So basically the difference between a post and a get request is post is like you're submitting a form on a website. So you're sending them form information. A get request, you're probably not sending them any data. You just want data back from them. So just say, give me all of this back. And that's a get request. Get this information. Or post is, I want to post this information to your site. So when you're dealing with like the FileMaker API, which it has now, it's the same thing. It operates on REST and it operates on those post and get and put. So you're going to post to create a record in FileMaker. you're going to get to do to get some information from FileMaker, and you're going to put changes, and you're going to delete if you want to delete a record. So there's all these standardized form methods out there that you can use to interact. So in the curl headers, that's basically most of what you'll be doing with FileMaker is you'll be specifying the method, which is like post or get, and you're going to be specifying what the headers are. So if you can do that and put that together, then you're pretty much ready to go to integrate an API. So let's move on to that. I'm going to close this out, and we're going to talk about Mercury. So Mercury is a web parser API, and a couple of years ago I was looking around at things that could take a website, a URL that I passed to it, and give me back the text of that website. So it's basically a crawler. So if I send it to Google, it won't really give me back anything because google.com is just a search box. But if I send it news.google.com, it's going to give me back like the code representation of what that page looks like. So, oh man, now my API key's in here and I have to obscure that. Oh well. I keep doing that. Well, if anybody wants to use my API, I think it's limited to like, what, 10 calls a day or something like that. And like, honestly, I had my login saved for this site from like 2 years ago, and I went there the other night to set up tonight's file, and it auto-logged me in, and I was like, oh, wow, I've already got a key. It's great. So basically, how I consume this API with FileMaker, I'm going to take a URL from a FileMaker field. So I have a FileMaker field that's storing a URL web address. I'm going to send it to this API and say, give me all of the scraped information about this API back. And then when it responds, it's going to give all that information to me. And then I'm going to take that and stick that into FileMaker fields. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking a URL and I'm scraping all the data into FileMaker fields. So let's take a look at that. So that is done. Yeah. Let's see what the news of the day is. Let's see if we can find one that's not about Trump, right? Nope. Yeah, sports World Cup. Okay, here we go. This is relevant to me only because it's like right next to my house. $50 million office apartment hotel project plan for Hamilton. So I'm going to create a new record in FileMaker, and I'm going to stick that URL in my URL field. Now you'll see I just buttoned up a script here that says parse, and that's going to do that script. So let's take a look at what that script does. So I made a comment here with that URL so that you know where that URL is. That URL is what's called an endpoint.
Run it once first.
Oh, no.
No.
I want to explain it first. I ran it first on the last record. There. That was already run. So this URL is what's called an endpoint. Now the endpoint is the URL that the API service that you're using gives you to make that API request. And it's not always going to be something obvious, like they might have /v1 for version 1, /API, and then there might be multiple endpoints like /contacts if you're getting back contact information, /maps if you're getting back map information. So really, when you're getting ready to actually integrate an API, the first place you're going to start is on their web page to figure out what they have. So you see on Mercury, and this is the reason why I liked it, is it's actually got really easy to read documentation for using their API. Authentications, requests to the parser API are assigned by your API key. sent in the headers of your request. So under the key, X API key. So that's my name, and my value is going to be my API key, and I'm going to stick that in the header that I send. So that's all I need to do for my authentication. I need a key value pair that says X API key equals whatever that jumble of text is that you're definitely not going to steal off the YouTube video, and stick that in my header, and that's what's going to make my request. So you'll see this is what the request actually looks like for curl, and I think I used my API key again here.
Sorry, what was that API key for? Where did you get it?
So when I signed up for an account, most API providers, they require you to sign up for an account, and when you sign up for an account, they give you a key for your account, and that authorizes you to use their API. Some of them are free, some of them are paid, some of them are open source, you know, it depends. Some of them have a limit where you can only make a certain number of API requests per day. Like Google, if you sign up for their free account, it's limited to like 1,000 map calls a day, and it's just capped at that number, which is it's enough for most people. You know, like if you're pulling map information for 50 records a day, that's fine. But if you're Bing and you want to actually pull their map information for 1 million addresses, they're going to charge you for that. So it depends on, some of them depend on volume, some of them, like this one, are free. Some of them are absolutely yeah. To get the API key itself, you usually have to sign up for an account. They don't just randomly generate them, because like if they did, then somebody could just randomly generate one and then abuse it. So it's usually behind an account. So you notice that their sample request actually has the word curl at the start of it, and that's because curl is actually a command line function. So you could go, if you have curl running on your local computer, you can actually go to your command line and copy and paste this and actually get a response in your command line, because you have the curl application running. It's a command line application. So you'll see that right after curl, though, our header starts. And it's got that X API key, and it's automatically stuck in that colon in the space, and then put the API key in here. And you'll see that it has another parameter, but notice that in the space between these two, there's not another comma H in there, because this isn't a header now that we're sending it. We're actually just sending it data. So there's no need to include any of their curl flag here, because it's expecting that we're going to send it a URL. Or, you know, it really doesn't matter what order you have it in, as long as that is true. As long as you have the tag, the dash tag letter space, and then quoted data for that. But as soon as those quotes close out, that H tag, curl automatically knows to close out that header tag from there. So you can, I believe, put it before the dash H if you want to. Fortunately, FileMaker takes care of a lot of it for you too. So you'll see that it actually gives you a format here that is, so we're not passing this as a post parameter. Well, we might be passing it as a post parameter, but we're not passing this as form data. So essentially all we're doing is we're sticking on the end of the URL that we want, we're sticking that on the end of their endpoint URL, and we're just sending the whole thing over. So curl is, when curl sends its request, it's going to send it to this whole URL. It's going to send it to mercury.postlight.com/parser ? And then with that request, it's going to send the header with our API key. So if you go back to our letter analogy, if you look at the cover letter of the letter we're sending in that envelope, the cover letter is just going to say X API key, here's my API key. And then the second page is going to have this URL, And then when they get that letter and they open it up and look at it, they're going to say, okay, they're going to check that API key and say, yes, this person can make this API request. And then they're going to go on and look to see what's after this equal sign for the URL right there. And then they're going to say, okay, he wants to scrape the data off of this URL. And it ends with a quote there. So that's it. That's all the request to that API looks like. Now let's talk about the response. So the response, you can see, is a little more complicated, but it's still not super complicated. So the response is the letter that you get back from them. This is your acceptance letter. So if it's an acceptance letter, you're going to get what's called a HTTP 200 code. 200 is just successful response. Everything's okay. If you get back a different number, like 404, that means that whatever endpoint you send it to is not found. It's the same thing as if you type that web address into a browser and it says this page isn't found. You know, you're going to get back those same requests. 401, 500, you know, those HTTP requests are, you know, standard ones that you would see anywhere on the web for things. I think 419 is like authorization error. So if you send a bad API key, they're going to send you back some rejection message up here. But if you do get a good response, they're going to send you a letter. Now, most of the time, the API, when it responds back to you, isn't going to include its own cover letter with its own headers for you. It's just going to give you the result of what you were asking for. So like if you're sending a letter in for college admissions, they're only going to tell you if you were accepted and this is your class schedule or something like that. So the data is what's coming back. Now you'll notice that this data is coming back in JSON format. And that's important because in FileMaker, as of version 16, we now have a bunch of native functions to help consume this data coming back. Now, this one's easy to consume because it's a flat one-dimensional array. That means that there's no nested arrays inside of it. There's no nested data. It's just title and what the title is, content, what the content is, date published, what the published is. So this makes it really easy to consume on the FileMaker side because I don't have to figure out how to dig through nested data at all. So, so basically what I'm doing here, when somebody presses that button, I'm going to check and make sure that they put a URL in that field. Seems logical. I don't want to send a bad request because the URL's not there. If I wanted here, I could do additional checks too. I could just check to make sure that it actually looks like a URL and somebody didn't just type in test and tries to post with that. So I could do more error checking here on that line. But if not, I'm just checking for if it's empty and then kicking it out. So here's my actual curl request that I'm building. So I put the API URL in here. I could have called it endpoint too, and that would have been good. And you see that's just that Mercury .postlight.com address. And now here's my headers. So I usually build my headers as all just one row. And you'll note that I didn't actually use a custom function here. I just did it all together. So essentially, I just did it as a calculation dialog. But you see I have my -h, and then you'll see I'm escaping that quotation so that this goes into quotes. I'm saying content type, application JSON, accept, application JSON, and there's my API key as well, X API key. So I have, the only header that it requires is the X API key. That's the one that the documentation told me this is required for authentication. So as long as I have that in there, I can probably get rid of these other ones and it would probably work fine. But I'm going to leave it in there just because. So the next step down is to actually make the call to the API. So I've built the headers, I've built my cover page that I'm going to send to that API. Now I want to send my letter to that API. And everything after this is just getting back the result and processing it. So API URL is the endpoint. URL is the URL that I want to scrape, that I want the information for. So when I actually go to make this request, I'm going to say stick it in a variable called result. Yeah. I could name these something probably a little better, but well, when I make that curl request, I'm making it to a request that has two URLs, but one is the parameter at the end of it. So yeah, now this was the stuff that was added in version 16, right? The verify the SSL certificates, a better response for what the target is. Variable target is so good. It used to be that you had to insert it into a field and then get the value of that field. And yeah. So where it says specify curl options, this is where you stick those headers. So it's going to send curl request, send your options, your headers with it, and then it's going to make that request to whatever URL you specify here. And that URL is just simply our API endpoint. And then I concatenate it on that question mark URL equals, and then this is the URL we want the information for. So we just simply put that together. And then after this line, we're going to have a variable called result. So I actually didn't add error checking in here because I got it to work on the first try. Yeah, everything is fine. There's never going to be any errors. All right. Well, we can add error checking. We still have 50 minutes left. And we're pretty much done at this point. So all of this stuff in here is just getting the result back. And that's using FileMaker's function, Json Get Element. So we're getting an element out of our JSON from the result and give me the one called title. So if you look at the sample response data, you see there's a tag in there for title. So when I do that function in FileMaker, it's going to give me everything between these two quotes. So it's actually going to give me that back. So as I go down everything in this list, it's just going to write out each one of those into my FileMaker data. So JSON Get Element, JSON Get Element. It's all the same. It's just different fields, different different parameters for the function. But it's all pulling from result. So result, 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 result. And then I'm going to say one other thing here for further processing. I'm going to say that if it gave me this field called lead image URL, I'm going to do another insert from URL. But this one, the second insert from URL isn't an API request. That's just saying point it at this container, lead image, and stick that image in there if you can. I'm also not error checking that. Were you? I thought you were going to get up and actually like try to set up the bird that's out there. All right. So Dave, you want to see this parse? Proof is in the pudding, and we'll see if the Foundry is blocking anything. There you go. So 50 million office, apartment, hotel project planned for Hamilton Road. Here's the content. Now the content, interestingly enough, is the HTML representation of the content. So I can actually stick that in a web viewer now. What is it? Data, text, HTML, comma. I don't know if that's it or not. I'm waiting for somebody on the chat window to like point me to the right thing. It might be text/HTML. Well, that kind of worked, but it article body span class, but so I don't have the CSS, so it's not formatted, but it is rendering that HTML. What does it accomplish? So if the dispatch now changes that article to remove it because one of their editors actually accidentally posted some hate speech online or something, I now have a local copy of what that was and when I retrieved it so that I can have a copy of that offline. So like archive.org, this is their entire application. They will scrape websites from off the internet and archive it in their own copy of it.
So, just because I remember that, can you just save them as HTML? Like, can you just
You can, but now that I have it like this is now searchable in FileMaker, which your HTML files on like your desktop aren't really. I have all of these fields split up as an index. So like if I want to search for articles that have a word count of greater than 500 characters or 500 words, I can do that right in here.
In my mind, a real life use case for something like this would be this really big one. So if you go back to when Facebook first started and the way they developed Facebook was that they scraped university student database systems, put it in Facebook system, now you have verification. You know all the students that the school.
Yep.
You were just scouring, open databases.
Yeah, this definitely can be used for advertising and malicious purposes, but
Is your power for
actually, I never, I've never figured out if FileMaker ignores a robots text thing in the web viewer.
They have a very, very firm disclaimer on their site, not to scrape it.
Yeah.
So you gave us the tools.
Technically, Mercury is scraping that web content.
True.
Technically. Well, I don't know if they, yeah. So the API might also have a warning, which it doesn't really say here. They might have a support, but they don't have any like thing on their page right here that says like, don't use this maliciously. So, but if you suddenly start getting errors and it's because that API has been taken down by the government, then that's one of the bad parts about relying on an API too, because what if that goes away, right? Well, hopefully you can just find another API that's close enough where you can just swap it out and use a different API, map it to your information. You might have to redo your integration, but again, you're talking about building this type of thing in under an hour now. Whereas before, you would have to use a plugin, you would have to write that whole curl string yourself. Hey, no, thank you. You would have to figure out how to execute that. It would be this multi-step process where now in your script, it's technically, I don't even need these variables up here. I can do both of those calculations right in this one line if I want to. So now it's, you have the power to do that in one line of FileMaker now. Yeah, there's very good reasons to break it out into its own thing.
So pick another example.
No, I've already done. That's it. It's the presentation, Joe. Look, I added a web viewer so you can preview the content that was scraped. And I did that while you were gone in the bathroom.
That part's all that, not what you were.
Why? I already have it in a text field. Well, I can just do, yeah, you can do whatever you want with it. But you see, it did go out to that article and actually get the image off of there. I got the thumbnail image, which was, well, I don't know if it's a thumbnail or it's probably just the size of my container. Shagbark Road. Actually, I'm not sure where that is. Oh well. But yeah, so now you can go and get the top 10 best iced coffees in Columbus from Columbus Underground. All right. So that one put the image in, yeah, because it's HTML in the content, so the HTML content must have linked to an image that you could get. But since it didn't also pull the CSS file, it's kind of not really formatted because the CSS isn't embedded in that content. So yeah, so that's a full-blown web scraper, and I promise I didn't take more than half an hour to put this file together the other night while I was watching Star Trek on my couch. All right. I'm going to stop for questions, and then we'll see about doing, we'll do error checking on the response, how to check your response that comes back. That'll be beneficial to you. Which Star Trek? Broadcast TV 10.2 shows, original series, Next Gen, DS9, and Voyager, Enterprise, all back-to-back weeknights. There we go. Right. I didn't watch all of them. No, I only watched, wait, what was on? I think it was Next Gen. But yeah, I cut the cable like 6 years ago, so I've got all the local broadcasts. 10.2 is like the nerd channel.
Is it?
It definitely is. They've got like Xena and like all the weird, like all the 90s like shows. And then 28.2 is like, do you remember G4 Tech TV?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Oh
what
my gosh,
28.2 is,
that's
G4 Tech TV. They show like YouTube video reels and stuff. Like, yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, I installed like a broadcast antenna like on the top of my house so I could pick up all the channels. And they keep adding more. Like WOSU has 4 channels now.
You don't have like Hulu or anything?
I have Netflix. I don't have Hulu. I don't have Hulu because I don't want to get into like just chain watching a TV show forever. All right. So no more questions about what we've covered so far. Let's get into. So what happens when I type in a URL that's just test? Nothing happens. And why does nothing happen? Because there's no result JSON, so every one of these functions fails. So I'm going to change this to if1, and I'm going to add a custom dialog that says, testing for errors. And I'm going to say result. And that's going to be my dialog box. I'm just going to see what result we're getting back from that. There you go. So you see it gave me a JSON response back. It says error is true. So it gives me a Boolean of true or false if there's an error. And it says the URL parameter does not, as messages is that. So I wonder if it can come back with, it's really weird that it has both error and failed, although maybe not. So maybe failed is if it outright fails to do anything. Error might be if there was an error, a partial error. So we really want to see if it's failed. So we're going to go back to our script. And now we're going to say, instead of just 1, which is true, we're going to say if Json get element, and we're getting that out of result, can't type, and we want to check for failed. And since failed results in true or false, this is going to be a true or false. I don't need to say equals true or not equals false, because it's just going to set this up. So that should give me that same dialog box because it's going to fail. There we go. So now I can actually change my dialog that says error encountered. And then I can do something like error was encountered during API call, error message, and I think it was Json Get Element result messages. So I'm going to stick the messages in there now. So there is that. I think the door is locked, so you might have to bring it back in. So now the dialog I have says, actually, error was encountered during API call, error message, the URL parameter passed does not look like a valid URL. Please check your data and try again. And now if I actually put something in there like google.com, try to parse it, it should flip over and actually finish because the result doesn't have that failed flag in it. And there you go, Google's featured image of the day. So that's error checking. If you want to get more detailed in the error checking, you'll probably be able to, based on just testing it out, figuring out what, like throwing bad stuff at it, figuring out what it spits back in an error message. And then you can do like a nested if statement under here and just say if, Json get element result messages, and then maybe wrap that in a pattern count. And then let's say URL is bad or something. So you could do more verbose error checking. And I'm going to say this is a URL error. So if I switch this back to test, parse, there's my URL error. Now I didn't tell it to exit out, so it's going to give me the second error message as well. So, as you come across these, as you test for these conditions, and as your users come across them from doing something in your app that you weren't expecting, like maybe they did google.com, but they put a space in front of it. Like, so if they put a bunch of spaces in front of the URL and you haven't taken care of that, you might get a URL. Or it might say, that's fine, I'll strip out the spaces for you. So, depending on what API you're consuming, you can really start to get detailed in fleshing out that script. But the basics are all the same. It's put together your request, make the request, check the result, do something with the result. And that's it. 4 steps, make them as complicated as you want or as simple as you want, and you can pretty much integrate any API out there you want. Last place I want to take you, and we're going to be ending about half an hour early, so we'll have plenty of time to talk and chat. The last place I want to take you is Programmable Web. So Programmable Web is a directory of APIs. Joe must already know about this one. Yeah. You suggested this topic, Joe. I'm just trying. I'm just badgering you. Just badgering you. Right. All right. So this one also lists SDKs, but essentially it breaks things up into categories of APIs. So analytics, animals, animation. So adult. Not sure about that one. So let's just say actors. I want to filter that. Filter. So actors. So let's see. Chuck Norris facts. Is that one you want, Joe? So you'll see it'll have some stuff in here. This has token-based authentication, which is slightly different. So let's see if... First off, I always just open up something, see what's going on. So this is get. So I'm going to copy that link address. And I'm just going to create a new script that says Chuck Norris. And I'm going to do insert from URL, not device. And I'm going to say my target is a variable of result again. And I'm going to specify the URL. And my curl options I'm going to set native H. And I want the curl header for requesting a get request, because this told me that it was a get request right here. So get FileMaker. So you see FileMaker, actually if you Google FileMaker supported curl options, this will give you all the headers that you can use. So if I do a search for get here, maybe I will find nothing. So I'm looking for method, really. Can you grab the door for him? So if I search for a method, FTP methods, weird. Well, let me go back to so we started going off the rails while you were gone. Now we're going to find Chuck Norris fact. But first I need to figure out how to create a get header.
Not like I know the quality, nice. Thank you.
Actually, I think it was in his sample script. If I look, he had a header for creating curl request post. So I'm looking for what curl request post looks like. So if I do curl request get, there you go. So -x is the code for that. That's the curl header code. well, it's not a header technically, it's X is a different type. So if I go back here, come on, cancel. So I'm going to say X get, and then I don't really have any other headers because I don't need any other headers. I just need to say it's a get request. And now I'm going to just show the custom dialog of the result. Let's drop that onto a button. And let's see what we got. I'm actually expecting this to break, except it didn't. Great. So let's do something with that message, right? So we got a bunch of stuff coming back from the Chuck Norris API. There's the response. So in our dialog, we can take that result and let's put a list response together. And I'm going to say, well, it's really only value is what we're interested in. So let's just get the value. Json Get Element out of result. And that is value, is what we want. And we're going to say random Chuck Norris fact. All right. So if I do that again now, we should get back a random fact. There we go. So every year on his birthday, Chuck Norris randomly selects one lucky child to be thrown into the sun. And every time I hit this now, since it's a random API, it's going to give me a new Chuck Norris fact every time. So do you time that, Joe? I think that was, what, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, 8 minutes? All right. Any other questions? That includes if anybody online still wants to ask a question in the GoToMeeting. All right. Postman. Yeah, Postman is a tool that a lot of us use. I've got it installed right here. And actually, I can't show that in the meeting because I've got a bunch of requests in there that, sorry. I have a bunch of groups of API requests for clients that I can't put in the recording. So yes, but Postman, let me just go to their page, which I believe is get. Yeah. So Postman does support bundles that you can import. So it's extendable by community-driven shortcuts.
So is this to make your own API?
No, Postman is basically to test API routes. But it gives you a more slick interface to yeah. So it also allows you to do. Yeah. Well, it depends on what you're doing though, because if you get into a real complicated API that requires you to like like FileMaker's data API is complicated. You have to like request a token first before you can make a request. So Postman will actually allow you to chain a couple things together where you get a result and it sets it as a variable in another call so that you can press one button and then press another button to test it. But I like it because it allows you to create like a whole collection of API tests and then duplicate that and use it on another project without having to rewrite everything. You can